Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this special presentation on supply chains driving profitable growth, first in a series of webinars presented by Gartner. One quick reminder before we get going, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, operational expectations for supply chains continue to rise, where efficiency, speed, cost control, and an elevated customer experience have become table stakes. On top of that, CEOs are looking to their supply chains to address a new challenge, driving profitable growth for the enterprise. This requires chief supply chain officers and supply chain leaders to rethink how the supply chain can grow the business and better serve their customers through ecosystem partnerships and innovative mindsets. So today, we're going to discuss how CSCOs, and supply chain leaders can reset their position from that of a cost and service center mentality to one of enterprise leadership. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Francesco Manenti is a research vice president in the CSCO strategies and planning team of Gartner. He provides insights and advisory support to chief supply chain officers and heads of strategy of global manufacturing and retail corporations into future trends and challenges affecting end-to-end supply chain strategy. Pierre focuses on strategic transformation, digitization, agility, and design for profitability. He has over 25 years of experience in supply chain strategy. Joanne Joliet is a research vice president in Gartner's CSCO strategy and planning team. Joanne provides insight and advisory support to chief supply chain officers and heads of supply chain strategy on the future trends and key challenges affecting end-to-end supply chain strategy for a multitude of industries, including consumer retail, industrial, high-tech, and life sciences. Joanne has 25 years of experience in the retail industry, including supply chain strategy and digital transformation. Michael Dominy is a research vice president in Gartner's CSCO strategies and planning team. Mike focuses on supply chain strategic planning, transformation, segmentation, and supply chain as a service, or as we're going to call it today, SCAS. He also covers the supply chain consulting market. He helps clients with strategic planning, business case creation, service provider selection, and roadmap development. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. We're going to divide it into three parts, starting with the why supply chains must push beyond efficiency and achieve profitable growth. That's going to set the table for us. Then we're going to go into what capabilities are needed to drive profitable growth through the supply chain. And finally, we'll tackle the how to advance commercial innovation and explore market opportunities. And don't forget, you can hear more on these topics and from these speakers and many other Gartner subject experts at the upcoming Gartner Supply Chain Symposium and Expo, the world's most important gathering of CS CEOs and supply chain executives. That's May 6th through 8th, 2024 in Orlando, Florida. Check it out at gartner.com/US/supply chain. There's a URL in front of you there. Of course, that information will all be provided to you at the end of this presentation. So let's move on with part one of our presentation. I'm going to pass it over to Pierre Francesco Manenti. Pierre, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. I am Pierre Manenti, Vice President Analyst at Gartner. So why supply chain driving commercial growth is critical for chief supply chain officers? Well, I'll start with a bit of a contextualization. During the past few years of heightened disruption, the focus on and the recognition of supply chain value changed, especially after the end of 2019 with the outbreak of COVID. Supply chain have been really under the spotlight, and many chief executive officers tended to see the supply chain in a different way with respect to the past, much less as a mere cost center and more chief chain as a critical function to the success of the business. And this is what you see in this chart, you see in particular the spike from 49% to 56% in between 19 and 2020. This is the number of respondents to the Gartner Future of Supply Chain survey answering that, yes, supply chain is understood by their CEO as very important to the success of the business. Supply chain leaders welcome this in this dialogue with the C-suite, as well as the understanding by their stakeholders of the impact and the role of the supply chain supporting the success of the business. However, since then we have seen many stakeholders, many CEOs somehow acclimatized to the continued disruptions around us, to the risk environment we are in. And as we repeat this survey every year, what we noticed, and you see on screen, that the share of business considering the supply chain as a critical business function went back to pre-COVID values. But there is hope. In digging into the results of the survey, we determined two groups of supply chains: the high-performing supply chains, those that exceed performance expectations for critical areas such as customer experience, time to market, revenue growth, and others. And then all the other supply chain, what we call low-performing. And we discovered that we are actually at a crossroad. On one side, there are those high-performing supply chains that are continuing on that path started in 19. And in fact, 72% of high-performing supply chain are recognized by their CEOs as critical function to the success of the business. On the other side, however, the low-performing, which are the majority of supply chain, for those that increased recognition is fading away. So things around us are changing rapidly, and we don't want to be or to miss an opportunity to be among the high performing while being recognized by the business. So what are these high performing organizations doing to maintain momentum with their chief executive officers? Well, in short, they are embracing commercial innovation. This is not about product innovation, but this is rather everything the supply chain can offer above and beyond the product. So critical services that enable customers to get their job done. As such, commercial innovation is a way to grow the top line by developing new and different offerings that is focused on commercial growth rather than on cost-cutting innovation. So why, however, there are so many low-performing organizations that are not recognized by the business? Well, there is a fundamental disconnection between what really matters to chief executive officers and what supply chains, low-performing supply chains are doing. So if we look at what is the number one business priority for chief executive officers, well, that is growing the business, which is 3.5 times more important than cost management for them, for CEOs. But however, if we look on the other side, 80% of chief supply chain officers do tend to prioritize more operational excellence initiatives, including cost-cutting initiatives, over respect to commercial innovation and support. Operational excellence is very important, don't get me wrong, but alone is not enough. There's a need to have a better balance. So the key message, the key advice that we want to deliver today to chief supply chain officers, especially for those in low-performing supply chain, is you need to do a better job in balancing operational excellence focus with a greater focus also on commercial innovation, which is what make high-performing supply chains so well recognized by the business.
Are you looking for a partner who can help you scale and grow your business? Saddle Creek has the technologies, resources, and expertise to optimize supply chain performance. They'll collaborate with you to understand your challenges and opportunities and design custom warehousing and fulfillment solutions that support your business goals. Saddle Creek will help you stay ahead of the curve, exploring new ways to increase efficiency, control costs, and add value. Learn more at sclogistics.com.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Pierre. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Joanne Joliet, and I am excited to talk to you about what capabilities are needed to drive profitable growth through your supply chains. As Pierre mentioned, there's a fundamental disconnect between what CEOs and CSCOs are prioritizing. Certainly, operational excellence is required in order to meet your customer needs. And that's really step one in the growth recipe for successful supply chains. Now, this is no surprise. Step one, maintaining customer satisfaction. No kidding, right? Our customers are expecting, their products to be high quality and on time and there when they need them. This is challenging given the ongoing disruption, but for most, this is incredibly hard even on a good day. And so CSCOs and supply chain leaders really need to take a hard look at their supply chains and understand what's impeding their ability to do the basic job of meeting their customer needs and their promise and obligation to their customers on a daily basis. We know that the impact to customer satisfaction is detrimental to the business. When we look at some of the data from our customer expectation survey, we can see that when customers are faced with a price increase or a decline in performance, they are more off-put by a decline in supply chain performance, quality, packaging, delivery. That's roughly 2.6 times greater than an increase in price. And so this really speaks to the fact that enabling your customers to work with you easily and be satisfied on a daily basis is really significant. This is step number one, and really encourage you to review your processes, review your technical and digital deficiencies. Look at how you empower your people to do this consistently in order to build the muscle towards profitable growth and commercial innovation. The second step in driving profitable growth in the supply chain is promoting customer ease. This is about reducing the friction and creating a seamless experience for your customers, whether they're B2B or B2C within your supply chain. We know how this is as consumers in our own lives, right? We're going to favor the companies that make it easy to work with, that provide recommendations, meaningful information, and certainly make it a one-click experience, if not a totally thoughtless and automated experience. When we look at this is really important to understand what's important to the customer. So, when we're looking at customer satisfaction, we're looking at satisfaction scores. When we're looking at customer ease, we're looking at certainly customer effort and what they have to do in order to do business with you. From the same survey, we can see that by creating greater enablement, both from a B2B and a B2B perspective, you're increasing the likelihood of repurchase by two times. So again, these investments in improving your processes and reducing that friction for your customer certainly will drive profitable growth simply from loyalty and consistent repurchasing. There are lots of examples that we see of enablement, and we'll talk about this, certainly in the panel discussion as well. But one of them is P&G. So P&G has done a great job for their retailers looking at data from sales by store at the inventory item level, and then creating information and recommendations that eliminate stockouts and really drive profitable sales for their partners. So Bob had mentioned ecosystem partnerships in the intro. That too is important here as you look at how you promote ease and enablement through your supply chain and your greater ecosystem. When I talk about the customer journey, most CSCOs and supply chains are looking at what's important to them. So this order to cash process. Pierre mentioned the mindset change that's going to have to occur between aligning to the CSCO's values and the CEOs and really putting the customer first. So CSCOs must start looking at the customer's purchase to pay and looking at where those friction points are. As you can see right here in the middle, there's a lot of waiting time and a lot of confusion and a lot of unknowing of what's happening when. Again, part of this is helping customers achieve satisfaction by serving them well, but also looking at where are these friction points across your journey and what you can do to remediate those, both through process changes as well as digital enablement. The last step in driving growth via the supply chain is looking at commercial innovation. Now, Mike will talk more about this, but this is about really driving those top line sales and revenue through either your products and services or potentially monetizing the supply chain. Again, these two steps of maintaining customer satisfaction and promoting ease are foundational. It is imperative that these are solidified and strong before you move into the commercial innovation space. After the break, Mike will talk to you a little bit more about this, and I look forward to your questions in the Q&A.
Again, do not forget the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium and Expo, Orlando, Florida, May 6th through 8th, where you will hear these experts you're listening to today, as well as a whole slew of other Gartner subject matter experts addressing all critical aspects of the supply chain. The Gartner Symposium, a great way for business experts to get together and benefit from each other's experiences, as well as avail yourself of the expertise of Gartner in a one-to-one kind of situation. Check it out at gartner.com/US/supply chain.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks everyone for attending. I'm going to cover the last section. I'm Mike Dominy, one of the analysts in the strategy and planning practice as well. I'm going to focus a bit on how. So how do you start tackling competitive advantage through supply chain as a service and commercial innovation more broadly? So first, I want to highlight there's kind of two ways that supply chains can drive revenue. So first, in the indirect category or indirect bucket, this is the customer enablement stuff that Joanne was just describing. How do we make it easier for customers to do their jobs, to accomplish what they need to accomplish? The other type of revenue generation is direct. So this is where the supply chain as a service, or SCAS, shows up. Either way, it's about turning the supply chain organization externally, going from an inside out, as we described, to outside in, customer and channel aligned. So what exactly is supply chain as a service? It's a buzzword. It's at the top of our hype cycle. Lots of people are talking about it. Lots of our clients are asking me about it. And there's actually some confusion. So what we've done at Gartner is we've come up with a definition to hopefully bring some clarity around exactly what is supply chain as a service. So supply chain as a service generates revenue by using your existing supply chain capabilities to drive improved business performance through the processes you offer in the market, through analytical capabilities that you might offer in the market, or physical operational capabilities in the market. You're performing it for another company. That may be your customers, if you're contracting with them, or in many cases, it's not your existing customers of your products. Supply chain as a service is a new source of revenue. Pierre mentioned this at the beginning. It's beyond the selling of your physical product. When companies ask me about supply chain as a service, and when I was doing the research around it, I'm like, how do you define it? This is how we came up with a definition. There's fundamentally three types of supply chain as a service. So the first type is operations as a service. So this is where I have, physical operational capabilities or capacity that I can offer in the market. These are associated with physical assets. I have a private fleet. I have a distribution center or a manufacturing site with capability or capacity that I want to offer in the market or take advantage of. Lots of activity happening in the retail market, specifically those retailers that have their own private fleet and have optimized around empty mile elimination, so reducing empty miles, and manage the optimization within their direct supply chain network. In manufacturing, we see some examples as well. Some of the high-tech companies are offering manufacturing as a service above and beyond what you see in the market from contract manufacturers or external manufacturing service providers. The second type of supply chain as a service are technology-based supply chain business processes, or supply chain business process as a service. These are non-physical operations-driven processes. There's a list of them that could be in here: planning and analytics, sourcing, procurement. It could also include any other management of a particular business process across plan, source, make, deliver, or service. The third type of supply chain as a service is product as a service. So these are service-centric business models. Let me explain this a little bit more, because this might not seem as obvious. when I talk with companies in the med tech space, in the high tech space, in the industrial discrete manufacturing space, think heavy industrial equipment, this product as a service business model is moving from I'm selling you a physical product. So I pick, pack, ship, or deliver the product, and now I close out the order to cash process to a subscription, consumption, or outcome-based model where the enterprise is contracting with the customer in a subscription or variable revenue model. Why is this supply chain as a service? It is supply chain as a service because the supply chain organization and its orientation has to change to being a service provider. It's providing services to the machine, to the actual asset that is located at the customer's location. So when companies would talk to me, I need to build supply chain as a service, what they were talking about is the servitization of products and the supply chain organization essentially needing to orchestrate all the activities around the delivery of services, capabilities, parts, technicians into an environment where the customer has that particular asset or product. So how prevalent is supply chain as a service today? It is still new in the market, early in the market. So in our future supply chain survey that we ran last year, we asked companies, are you offering supply chain as a service today? And as you can see, roughly 21% of organizations says, yes, we are. Now, my belief is that a large percentage of that are actually in that product as a service category because those subscription-based business models are not terribly new. They've been around for a number of years. So that's where most of the activity is. However, when we ask, where do you see this in 3 to 5 years? You see a significant jump. So this will be across all 3 types of supply chain as a service. It's driven by not only the capacity and capability within supply chain organizations, but also things like technologies and the ability to actually contract and manage above and beyond what the organizations are requiring.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. And at this point, let's move into the panel discussion portion of our presentation. Mike, come back on camera, please. And Joanne and Pierre as well. I want to see all of you so I can drill you into some interesting questions that'll help us to understand more about what is actually a really innovative and paradigm-busting kind of presentation you're giving us here. Let me start with this, and maybe I'll start by directing this question to Pierre. I have heard so much these days about the problem of the misalignment of priorities between CSCOs and CEOs. How can chief supply chain officers get CEOs on board with the need for commercial innovation? And for that matter, how do you sell the value of supply chain when cost management and growth are major considerations of CEOs, boards of directors, and shareholders? Pierre?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's two things that CSCO need to do. First is, if you like, the alignment to the business, as you said, which is often not there. And the second is a matter of communicating the value clearly, the value of the supply chain to the business. The issue I see in general is that CSCOs are actually squeezed in between. Requests for continued cost cutting. Typically, this is coming more from the CFOs and COOs rather than CEO, right? So but there's a significant pressure for that. On the other side, chief executive officers, regional business leaders are pressuring the supply chain to be able to extend an ability to deliver more and more services, more products, more customized products, and so on and so forth. So the risk for CSCO is to be buried under this squeeze. So they need to get out from that. So really understanding that from a CEO perspective, what really matters is supporting the growth of the business and also be self-confident that actually the role of supply chain is much more than cost cutting. Actually, it is the supply chain that has all the important touch points with the customers, right? So it is role of the supply chain to be able to support the growth of the business, right? Of course, communicating that is also very important in those organizations that still see the supply chain as a traditional cost-cutting function.
Joanne, how do you see this alignment issue, especially with regard to the need for commercial innovation?
Yeah, I think given Mike's last slide on the projection of how many will be adopting this, supply chains really don't have a choice, right? This is going to become a competitive differentiation in the market, being able to drive this top line growth through the supply chain. And so when you look at the risk of not doing it, CEOs, CSCOs, the entire organization need to get on board with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like the very existence of the CSCO today, and I don't think it's been around for more than about 15 years, a little bit more than that. The C in it puts it in the C-suite. You would think that that indicates that organizations want to listen to what the CSCO has to say about things other than cost cutting. We can only hope that that's the case. Thank you for that. Let me stick with you, Joanne, because I want to talk about this idea of communicating with the customer and giving customer ease, customer satisfaction. All sounds great on paper. But for instance, how can supply chains maintain customer satisfaction in the face of disruptive events over which they have no control?
Yeah, I mean, we won't solve this or answer this in the time that we have, but certainly disruption is not slowing. We saw that with the recent events of this week, the tragic events in Maryland. And so supply chains have to be prepared for that. They can't predict those events, but they have to be prepared. And that means a robust risk management framework that allows them to maintain customer satisfaction when things don't go as planned. As I mentioned, our supply chains are complex. They're challenging on a good day, let alone when things go bump in the night. And so looking at that, looking at your strategy, protecting what is important to delivering to the customer, and then enabling it with the right digital tools that allow you to get that sense of what the customer experience is through digital technologies, sensing disruption so you can preempt it where possible, and then empowering your people in order to truly put the customer first in order to satisfy them.
Well, very often, supposedly the solution to dealing with customers when something goes wrong is communication, which makes sense. There's a lot of truth in that, clearly. Communicate, communicate, communicate. But, Joanne, is it possible to over-communicate with the customer?
It is. And we've seen this in the retail industry where personalization bleeds into intrusiveness. And so, even when you step back into the supply chain, it is possible to over communicate. The communication has to be meaningful. It has to be accurate. It has to be timely. Anything above that is really just going to create frustration for the customer. A silly story, and I think many of us will experience this, is, today when you make a reservation at a restaurant, you get a confirmation and then they text you to confirm your reservation. You just made the reservation. And so that's a great example that we deal with day to day where over communication is not valuable. It's actually creating a very disappointing situation.
Mm-hmm. And then the next day before the reservation happens, I'll remind us, are you still coming?
That's right. That's right.
Didn't I tell you I was coming? Yeah.
I'll jump in here and just provide a comment as well. So one of the areas I also research is around customer experience. So how do you deal with that issue Joanne was just describing? How do you mitigate that? So by analyzing or defining your customer experience more broadly, and specifically doing something we call journey mapping. So identifying the journey in which the customer is interacting with you as an enterprise and making sure you're eliminating frustrations, friction points, etc. And supply chain, of course, plays a role throughout that when you start dealing with the shipment of products, returns, all the various activities that touch or interact the customer experience.
Forgive me if I want to stay on this customer experience subject just a little bit longer. The idea of customer enablement. Pierre, what are some examples of customer enablement? And for that matter, who's doing it well today?
Well, a great example that I love and the team love as well is from the British oil company Castrol. So what they have done, they have created a fully automated lubricants replenishment process by equipping and making the investment for IoT devices to monitor their customers' tanks, the level of the lubricant. And so when the level goes below a certain threshold, well, then lubricant truck are deployed to refill the customer tank, right? So Castrol and each clients agreed on a service level, right? And at that point, it is Castrol's supply chain responsibility to maintain the level of lubricant, on behalf of the customer. The advantage is that level of visibility, and this is happening throughout all Europe, is helpful for optimizing transportation, reducing the cost of delivery, but also improving sustainability that is then delivered back both the cost reduction and the sustainability levels back to the customer. So this is an example of getting their job done, so helping the customer beyond just delivering the mere product, which is what supply chain are doing traditionally. So they actually change completely the nature of the commercial relationship with the customers through this type of replenishment, where the supply chain is at the center. If supply chain do a great job, then the customer is happy and somehow locked in this supply chain. So I think this is a great example of commercial innovation.
Yeah, we're going to be talking more about that, obviously. Joanne, you have a perspective on the whole idea of customer enablement, examples, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in our daily lives, we like it to be thoughtless, right? I want my my ink to come before I need it. I want my fridge filter to come before I need it. And what Pierre's talking about is really preempting the customer's request and anticipating that. Another great example is from Johnson & Johnson and what they did with Rush hospital systems, healthcare systems, in their sutures. When we think about surgery, closing the wound and the precision of the suture and having the right suture really results in, positive healing and health outcomes. The problem that they were having was there were sutures everywhere, and they didn't have the right sutures. They didn't have the right size. They weren't in the right place. And so what they did is they looked at the overall process, and they moved where the sutures were to closer to the operating rooms. And they put them in weighted cabinets so that they could see what's being used and when. And so similar to Castrol, they could automatically replenish what was needed. And so this certainly helped them reduce the time that it took to get to product into the hospitals. It allowed them to see which sutures were better used and really created a more optimized solution for them and ultimately their patients. They started with an investment of about $100,000, and in the first year alone, due to elimination of waste, faster speeds, patient outcomes, they had an ROI of $450,000. They also rationalized their SKUs in that scenario. So this is just one example of enablement, right? And enabling the healthcare providers to do their jobs better, not really thinking about ordering and really focusing on the patient and what's important to them and their success.
Really creative, interesting. Mike, I want to know a lot more about supply chain as a service, whether or not we're going to call it SCAS or not. It's irrelevant. But from the standpoint of the receiver of these services, is this essentially just a fancy new term for outsourcing? And if not, how is it different?
Interesting. In the broadest way that we describe business process outsourcing and supply chain outsourcing, it effectively would be yes, would be the answer. What's different is above and beyond your typical supply chain service providers like 3PLs, external manufacturing service providers, and on. Enterprises are getting into the game. So companies are actually effectively competing in the market. So they're extending their existing supply chain capabilities out and offering that to essentially drive more and more revenue and value for organizations. So in a nutshell, you could view it as that. I think the other thing I would add on it is the word outsourcing is a little bit of a dirty word. So folks, nobody wants to be outsourced or be, dealing with outsourcing. In supply chain as a service, especially the enterprise-driven supply chain as a service scenarios are more about an extension of your existing supply chain organization. So not necessarily getting rid of people, enhancing what you're able to do and how you're able to do it based upon leveraging world-class, top-notch capabilities that are coming from another organization that is able to externalize it and scale it.
Well, Mike, you did a great job of delineating for us the various types of services that might be delivered under a supply chain as a service model. Do you believe, though, that the model works equally well for the provision of, say, technology solutions on one side and actual physical logistics services on the other?
So it's a good question. It depends. I will highlight that the physical operations aspect can be more complex because we're dealing with actual physical products. So we have to, if we're just take a simple example, like a distribution center and a retailer or manufacturer or distributor or somebody along the lines has excess capacity and they have the capability to actually manage products because they do it within their own distribution center. Like I have that extra capacity. Okay, so I want to offer that in the market. I want to have, offer terms storage or something like that. Well, how are we going to partition that warehouse? Let's set that up. We have to schedule the inbound deliveries. How do we manage the receiving of that? What happens when the customer that we're contracting with wants to get that product out? So additional elements around it that add some real world complexities. On the digital side, there's a whole, and I have a playbook. I'll be talking about at symposium around this. There's a whole set of steps that you have to put in place in order to activate. Of course, you have the software, but you have master data. This comes up all the time as a major challenge, just generally in supply chain, and in particular in supply chain as a service. Integration, not only from a technology perspective, but also from a business process perspective. That obviously applies in the operations side as well, but in the business process side, folks underestimate that a bit. And then what are the right metrics? If I'm offering a business process as a service, as an example, what are the service level agreements I have in place? Operational level agreements I have in place? How quickly will I be able to respond? How many orders am I going to be able to forecast, orchestrate, and et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm wondering also, Mike, maybe Joanne can weigh on this as well. Just exactly what kind of company and its accompanying supply chain would benefit most from a reliance on supply chain as a service? By definition, a smaller one that needs somebody else to bring those services in-house, or a large one anyway? Large, medium, small, Mike? Where do you think the sweet spot is here?
Yeah. So the where I see this happening kind of the most and where the sweet spot really sits is kind of medium-sized companies. And how do I define that? Kind of arbitrarily, I draw a number at roughly $1 billion in revenue or less for US-based companies. In Europe, it might be a little different, and certainly in other parts of the world. But those medium-sized companies, and why? So why is that? They have at least enough of the foundational elements and capabilities in place today in order for in particular, a large enterprise to engage and contract with them and deliver services. Many times the much smaller organizations lack things like a full ERP system. They struggle to manage various things. The other thing I will highlight is there are large enterprises that actually are contracting and engaging others in a supply chain as a service model. So one example, and this is in the public domain, so I can kind of describe it, is McDonald's. So McDonald's does not effectively do their planning, forecasting, and replenishment. So they engage with Javi Global Solutions, which is a distributor, but it has an arm or an offering that's in the supply chain as a service space, providing planning and analytics as a service. So it varies. I would also highlight there are companies in the Gartner Top 25 as an example that are engaging in supply chain, and these are large companies, obviously, engaging in supply chain as a service. And the reason being is they want to free up their internal staff, their internal folks, to be able to work on higher value activities. Or, an example of that is in the supply chain planning area. So how do I get, this is what one of the CSCOs said to me, how do I get my planning folks who are very talented and skilled and very cross-functional in their capabilities out of managing the application, creating the forecast, running all those things? Isn't there a better way to do that? So they essentially contracted with an external service provider to deliver or manage those various planning activities. They didn't get rid of anybody. They then redirected or focused those individuals on things like overall supply chain segmentation.
Joanne, what's your perspective on the sweet spot of company that is most benefit in terms of size from this, as well as the particular industries that might be especially applicable?
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on, are you on the giving side of this or the receiving side of this, right? So I'm with Mike, right? Obviously, it's kind of Goldilocks effect. Middle is the easiest. For companies who are really small and don't have those capabilities, right? It makes sense in order to adopt these services from other companies rather than making the significant investment. Certainly, there might be speed to market as they're growing. Also, you have others who are in the space, fulfillment by Amazon. It is really hard to beat the offering of Amazon when it comes to fulfillment. And so you see others who are using those services even when they directly compete with Amazon. Generally, we see the larger companies who have the, very, very deep investment portfolios to build these capabilities and then be able to turn those around and offer those to others within the market. As far as industry, we're seeing it across all industry, right? And so relative to your supply chain strategy, really looking at where is there an opportunity to leverage supply chain as a service to minimize your costs, minimize your friction to your customer, or is there an opportunity to drive your top line growth if you are at that position? So again, there's no right answer for this. It's dependent on the strategy and certainly the maturity of the company.
On the other hand, Joanne, it would seem to make a lot of sense that if you want to provide your supply chain services to another company under this model, that it be a company in the same industry as you are, because that way you more intimately understand what it is the receiver of those services needs from you. On the other hand, does that raise competitive concerns if the receiver of services is in your same industry?
Naturally, it would, but you really have to look at what data is being shared, and is that really going to impede your competitive advantage? Again, I just mentioned Amazon, and certainly there are very few companies out there that don't compete with Amazon. But when you look at that offering and what they can bring to your capability and ultimately your customer experience, it makes sense. When we published our potential of ecosystems executive report last year, we looked at the limiting factors of people coming together and partnering, whether it's around supply chain as a service or digital ecosystems or what have you. And what we found was the reasons of not doing it were far less than the benefit of doing it. And so when you look at engaging in supply chain as a service with a competitor or with somebody even in your same industry, really look at, is it going to infringe on your competitive advantage, your customer ability and aspects of that. And I think what you'll find is that you will go a lot farther together than just trying to do it alone.
Sure. At this point, I'd like to bring the audience in for audience Q&A sessions. And even as we are answering those questions that have already come in, audience members are certainly encouraged to continue to submit their questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can, time permitting. So this one, I think I'm going to direct to Pierre. Just give us an example, Pierre, of a company that is monetizing its supply chain. And I love that concept. So please tell us, where is that actually happening?
Great question. So one name that comes to mind is a company called Woolworth Group, which is from headquartered in Australia. They are primarily active in retail. And as such, they have traditionally a very large footprint in Australia. For other organizations that doesn't have a footprint in Australia, entering Australia is quite difficult, right? Because it's a very large country, population is distributed, harsh conditions, not easy, right? So, and this supply chain from Woolworth was considered a competitive advantage, not only for their own group of companies, but also as an opportunity to monetize it, right? So this is how the story started. Actually, a few years ago, they actually started selling some of these capabilities to other organizations, not necessarily their own customers, but fast forward to today, to any company that actually want to enter the Australia and New Zealand business, to a point that they actually branded that Primary Connect. They created a company within the company, and today Primary Connect is a company, part of the Wolfwood Group, is actually their supply chain. They are offering supply chain services internally, of course, but also externally to over 1,000 clients. And they offer what they got, right? If you think to the definition that Mike shared before, right? So it's logistics services, it's transportation services, and on top of that is also services to improve, service level results, cost cutting and optimization to their clients, right? So I think it's a great example of a company who realized the value of their supply chain capabilities and put it on the market.
Wow, that is a great example. This question is kind of about how you put all the pieces together in a supply chain as a service model. I wonder, the question is wondering if the CSCO is drawing on resources, of course, within its own organization, maybe as well as those from its larger supply chain ecosystem, outside supply chain partners that it outsources stuff to. And in the case of the latter, are you not essentially reselling services that are provided by your outside supply chain partners, thereby necessitating a higher price for them in order to accommodate the middleman, that is you, the provider of the services, the middleman's margin? Mike, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I guess one thing that's really important to stress related to that question is you can offer one or more capabilities in a supply chain as a service model. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are orchestrating and managing all aspects of another company's supply chain. So that's the first thing I would highlight. Regarding your comment on kind of reselling that, typically the examples of I am providing supply chain, when folks will say I'm providing supply chain as a service to a customer, when we dig into it and we talk to them, what they're really doing, or where they ultimately wind up, is supply chain customer enablement. They're providing value added or value differentiating services into their customer with the goal, the focus being to drive revenue of their existing products. Now, attempting to build in and force the increased price, I see as a non-starter. It becomes a dissatisfier. You're essentially forcing a customer to buy a product. A service is kind of like a product that they may or may not want to purchase. So I would highlight kind of those couple of things. Really, you don't have to pick all of them. You could do one or more. I think this also highlights something that's important for those organizations that are offering kind of an end-to-end set of services. That value, that offering, is separate from what they're doing. So as a core business, let me give you an example. Like, what does that mean? So a very good example of this is Avnet. So they're a distributor in the high-tech industry. So they have value-added customer services that they offer to their OEMs and to suppliers that are tied to their core buy-sell distribution business. So they have that model, and there are services that are included. Companies can purchase those services, pay for those services within the context of that buy-sell relationship as a distributor. They have a standalone business unit that offers supply chain as a service. And what that group does is they essentially bring together that ecosystem of services that can include, and often do include, contract manufacturers, includes 3PLs, includes other supply chain partners, puts that together in a total solution and presents that as an overall value proposition or total solution to customers. So it's, I think, delineating between providing supply chain as a service to your customers and forcing them to kind of buy that and increasing the price of your products, which becomes kind of a competitive disadvantage, to offering it as a separate business unit that you're standing up. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
I think so. Joanne,
Okay.
maybe you have something to say also on the economic reality of how this all works.
Yeah, I would just add a quick comment to that. Again, you look at this and it seems like it's going to increase the cost of the customer. Again, oftentimes companies can more efficiently deliver to their customer by buying those capabilities rather than building them themselves. And so I don't think that it is a unilateral, output that this is going to be more expensive and increase the margin to your customers. It actually could do the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Related question, though, in order to provide your services, your supply chain resources to another entity down the line, do you not have to acquire a certain amount of additional staffing and technological resources to put in place that mechanism? And if so, what does a company need to acquire in order to be able to offer its supply chain services to another entity? Mike.
So great question. Many organizations that offer supply chain as a service, they usually start off with what I call an extend and scale model. So what they're doing is they're leveraging their existing resources, their existing people, the existing investments they made around technologies and their capabilities, and they're just starting to offer it to other organizations. That sounds really great. The problem is you get to a certain point when you move beyond opportunistic supply chain as a service and you really want to scale it and grow it, where it becomes painfully obvious that you need to have dedicated staff. Starting off, even with that extend and scale kind of a model, there's a couple of key resources you need to have in place. First is someone that's effectively a product manager, so equivalent to a strategy and product management person that would exist in a software company. Somebody that's defining the go-to-market strategy, how we're going to sell it, the value proposition, engaging with customers, getting all those things in place. You'll also need somebody that has the expertise that looks like a project manager that works through all those elements within the playbook around getting the right data in place, getting the integrations to work, getting the governance to work, et cetera. So there's some initial investments that's required if you're really going to do this beyond opportunistic, and those two resources would be key. And as you start scaling it, even like, for example, in the digitally driven, the business process ones, you still need some degree of people to support those customers. This is true in pure play kind of scenarios in the software market. You need support people, right? You also need that in a supply chain as a service model. And depending on which variation of that, there may be more or fewer resources. Clearly, in the physical operations space, you're going to need to take that down into the folks that are working within the sites. If you start scaling this, that's where we really start to see the kind of addition of folks needing to be incorporated.
Thank you. Well, I have to be the bearer of bad news in this fantastic presentation. That is that we are just about out of time. We have time for just one more question, and I'm going to pose it to each of you. I'm going to start with Joanne. Joanne, there is a lot of hype around supply chain as a service, especially given the requirement for profitable growth. Where do I, the entity watching this program and wanting to put your advice into action, where do I start?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an exciting opportunity for CSCOs and supply chains, no doubt whatsoever, but you have to take a very measured approach towards this. Going back to my portion of the presentation, I feel very strongly that you need to get that foundation in place. Your customer satisfaction and being able to maintain those levels consistently is step one. If you're not doing that, you need to focus on that and build that building block and then move towards customer enablement. This is your opportunity to grow that muscle and strengthen that muscle so that you are ready for commercial innovation through some of the methods that we talked about today. If not, if you go too fast, you're going to fail, and that's going to be disastrous.
Pierre, what's your insight on that? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think there are two initial focus area, in my opinion. I have to start with the first is mindset change, the second is communicating the value. So, first is really changing the traditional mindset in supply chain. So I think supply chain leaders need to realize that they don't have to only focus on operational excellence, cost cutting. And I'm afraid that the majority of the CSCO, their DNA is really into being a cost center. So you need to move on from that, and then embrace an opportunity to aligning to the needs of the business. So don't place yourself into the cost cutting corner, right? Because you won't be able to get out from that corner. The second is about clearly communicating, as we were saying before, that value that your supply chain can deliver to the business. That is really the ability to deliver on the extremes of customer expectation. So there is much more than cost cutting in the future of supply chain.
Mike, how do I get off the starting line?
First and foremost, you have to perform go-to-market strategy assessment. So that involves kind of an analysis of your current capabilities, analysis of the competitive landscape, defining how you would go to market, the routes to market you would take. My advice is also start small, leverage where you are truly differentiated. Where do you have that true competitive differentiation in the market? And then finally, absolutely, you need to create a playbook and start with a lighthouse customer. Invariably, the first customer you work with, not everything will work perfectly. So you need somebody that's a friendly face or friendly customer to start with, work through those issues, and then enhance and refine your playbook.
So we've gone from supply chain as a cost center to elevated to a position of value, competitive value within the organization. And now we're taking another step to where the supply chain becomes a source of monetization. That is a really interesting, innovative approach. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing that perspective. And hey, listeners, if you want to hear more about this, and I'm sure you do, because I do as well, please join us at the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium and Expo in Orlando, Florida, May 6th through 8th, 2024. Where Pierre and Joanne and Mike and a whole slew of other Gartner subject experts will be there to talk more about this and every other subject under the sun related to supply chain management and excellence. So thank you for that. And by the way, there's the URL, gartner.com/US/supply chain. But here is but you'll get that information afterwards. All attendees will receive that as well. And by the way, stay tuned for episode 2 in this current series. This topic will be supply chain sustainability strategy to action. The date is April 18th, 2024 at 11 a.m. ET. There's a QR code for you to scan. If you don't have time to do that, once again, that too will be provided to all attendees of this webinar. Thanks again, everybody, for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, audience, for your participation and your great questions. Everybody, have a great day.